So if you're interested in climate change, there's probably two options. Either you're already perfectly well aware of the Bali climate talks, or you're actually at the Bali climate talks. I'm going to be covering this on my blog quite a bit, so I thought I'd go through a few of the points which I've picked up. The first point is, this is a print off of my blog, November 8th, Global Day of Action on Climate Change. So if you go to www.globalclimatecampaign.org, you'll be able to find out if it's happening in your country. I think it's happening in about 70 countries. In the UK, I think there are three locations. There's Belfast, Glasgow and London. So if you can get to Belfast, Glasgow or London on December 8th and you're in the UK, then be there. I'll be in Glasgow. Right, so that's the Global Climate Campaign. You know, good luck to it. Get involved if you can. I mean, certainly if you're in London, the office is down in London where they're coordinating this stuff. But you know, if you've got an email account, then basically you can help raise publicity about it. So I'd encourage you to do that. Otherwise, so what's happening in Bali at the moment? So first off, my first post on this was, it doesn't say on here. It's perhaps nearly 2 weeks ago, I'd guess, and I listed some of the blogs which are going to be updated live from Bali, and some of the top climate blogs, as well as some good news sources, because when this is all going on, if you're interested, the last thing you want to do is hear the BBC or CNN little clippets saying India's said it's not going to accept binding targets, and the US has said it must, etc. But without any real background, without the details, because they do tend to simplify things. You might have noticed that. If you notice that, the media tends to simplify things. So the news sources, the best news sources, I'd say, would be, I don't know if you can see that there, NGO coverage. The Eco newsletter, that's by the Climate Action Network, or the International Institute of Sustainable Development. They have the Environmental News Bulletin. The Eco newsletter is more readable. The Environmental News Bulletin is more technical, and they're probably two good sources of information. Then, of course, there's the official website. All this is on my blog. If you go to if you find any article with this logo here about Bali, then you just click on the Bali tag and it brings up all the posts. The other things are obviously there's Celsius, the Smog blog, Climate Shift, Climate Feedback. These are some sort of standard good climate blogs. But then It's Getting Hot in Here, which is a youth blog about climate change, is going to be updated quite a bit. From that, it also links to a blog which they're doing specifically from the talks, and Oxfam International in Bali, that should be a good one as well. So that's a few news sources for you. What else? The next post I had was Australia. Well done, Australia. Brilliant. That's a brilliant sign for all of us. I see the Canadians have made a big deal about it, obviously, because their government, which is not that much worse than the last government, although you know Stephen Dion seems to be saying a bit about how great he was. But anyway, you know, their government at the moment seems to be awful on Kyoto, pretty much ignoring it. Obviously, some of the provinces are stepping up a bit, but this federal government in Canada is a bit of an embarrassment. I think most Canadians would agree. But they've made a lot out of Australia, because you know it's hope, isn't it, that if climate change is going to become a significant issue, as it seems to have become in Australia, and the first thing that Kevin Rudd's going to do is ratify Kyoto, and he's going to head off to Bali to become involved in negotiations. It's also good because now, although Canada's not really living up to its goals, it is actually signed to Kyoto, so America's the only one left behind on that. So that was brilliant news. Well done to Australia. Right, the next thing I wrote about was actually a whole list of things that are happening in the run-up, and sort of all the politicking and various statements from different countries. So top of that list, of course, was Kevin Rudd. Then it was the fact that Canada had managed to destroy the Commonwealth consensus on climate change. So the Commonwealth, which is a bit of an old-fashioned organisation, it was basically Britain and its colonies. They still have their meetings, so I'm sure they managed to find some sort of reason to keep these going every 2 years. So that's not very often. I think it's every 2 years. And they were going to try and come to some sort of agreement on climate change. And all of them, because you remember the Commonwealth, a lot of these are small island states, and they threatened of being submerged by climate change. So there's a lot of energy behind getting the whole of the Commonwealth as a bloc to commit to mandatory targets, mandatory carbon reduction targets. But Canada managed to sabotage that effort, basically. The next bit was the IPCC summary for policymakers is just out. This is like an 18-page document. So the IPCC documents, there are 3 reports which they published, thousands of pages in total. But if you want to see just a summary, then that's where to go. That's a place to go. The International Crop Research Agency predicted an agrarian crisis as a result of climate change. Israel has decided not to send a delegate, not one delegate to the talk, so that was quite fascinating. But I also did read a post recently about the fact that it seems just more or less in line with what's happening in the US with the awakening about climate change. Israel is undergoing a similar transformation, although it hasn't yet reached the Environment Secretary. I've got here Nancy Pelosi will be leading a Democrat delegation to Bali. It was rumoured. I don't think she will be now. I think she's working on a Senate climate bill. But I'm sure Kerry is going to be representing the US in Bali, because I heard him on the CFR podcast talking about that. WWF has published a report about the savings China could make by embracing energy efficiency. France and China have signed an agreement to improve cooperation on science and technology training. The biggest report that I've seen on climate change recently has been the 2007 UN Development Report, which seems to have been quite, I'd say probably unique in a UN report, from the way it's being reported anyway, as taking some fairly political stances on things, and certainly not sort of dodging any punches and saying this is a real crisis, and that if the developed world doesn't get on board soon, and if the developed world doesn't start paying significant reparations to the South, then it's going to be a complete crisis for the world poor, and poverty is going to be made permanent. Brazil joins Indonesia in agreeing to limit deforestation if the wealthy nations of the world will fund the project. This is one side of a situation we're in at the moment. Seems to be that developing countries are not willing to take on mandatory targets, and people go, well, what's the point then? You know, why would the developed world bother cutting emissions if China's only going to? Framing this in a completely absurd way. China is miles behind in terms of development and miles ahead in terms of policy. It's really amazing where they're going with climate policy. They've got 20% renewable energy targets by 2020. Do the US have that? Do you have that in the US yet? No. We've just managed to get that in Europe. And China, which is years in development terms behind both the US and Europe, has got 20% renewable energy targets by 2020. It's got higher fuel efficiency standards than the US. There's a whole list of things. They've got an energy efficiency program, which is the most ambitious in the world. They've got energy efficiency targets for individual processes, such as cement or steel manufacturing, these sort of things. They're really getting on board with this stuff. But the real crime, which doesn't seem to be highlighted, is the fact that the developed nations with the responsibility to act won't seem completely unwilling to actually give funding to the